News. So tonight we would like to welcome everybody to our Spotlight on Grads. This is the first time we're doing this particular style of webinar. We hope it will take off and we can continue with other graduate students down the line. So our guest moderator tonight is Professor Deborah Nadoolman Landis, PhD of the David C. Copley Chair and Director, UCLA, of the David C. Copley Center for Costume Design. She's the costume designer of many iconic films, including The Blues Brothers of 1980, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Trading Places, and the first Coming to America, which of course has come to everyone's attention with a sequel lately, but for which she was nominated for an Academy Award back in 1988. As a two-term president of the Costume Designers Guild and past governor of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Landis has been a lifelong advocate for costume designers, and we will hear about that tonight. She has also authored 6 books, including Hollywood Sketchbook and Hollywood Costume, the award-winning catalog of the blockbuster Victorian Albert Museum exhibition. Deborah Nadoolman Landis is the editor-in-chief of the 3-volume Bloomsbury Encyclopedia of Film and Television Costume Design, which we are all familiar with.
Thank you, everybody. I'm very excited to be hosting this first of what I hope to be a spotlight on the work of graduate students. You all should know that I'm a professor at UCLA. Teaching graduate students is my day job. It is my passion to teach the next generation of scholars and costume designers. And we depend upon our graduate students to really be us in the future, and just as diligent and just as committed and just as passionate about the work. So today we're going to meet with 2 students. Ashley Baker, who is going to talk to us about her MFA capstone. She's a graduate student in her last year of costume design for her MFA at the University of Oregon. She earned her BFA in costume design and technology from Central Washington University in 2016. She's worked for companies such as Walt Disney World, Disneyland Resort, Cirque du Soleil, and the Weston Playhouse Theatre Company. Leigh Du Puis. She's a PhD candidate in apparel design, circus, and theatrical costume at Cornell, where she is combining her extensive professional career as a circus and theatrical costume designer and technician with her formal training in functional apparel design. Her dissertation centers on the safety and function of attire worn for the extreme physical performance of the circus arts. And she uses mixed methods and design research practices to explore the history of circus costume. So without further ado, I would like to introduce both Ashley Baker and Leigh Du Puis.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to CSA for inviting me to be a part of this panel. My name is Leigh Du Puis, and I go by Jenny Lee, or JL, and I'm a PhD candidate at Cornell University. I'm in my 3rd year, set to graduate in 2022, fingers crossed, of course. And prior to returning to academia, I worked for 10 years as a circus and theatrical and freelance costume designer and technician. So tonight you'll be hearing from Ashley, I think, about her capstone project, but you'll be hearing from me about various projects and career things that I have been able to do over the years, because it's been a range of experiences and maybe something can help somebody who's in the audience. So without further ado, I graduated from LaSalle College, now LaSalle University, in 2006 with a degree in fashion design and production. All of my degrees are in fashion or apparel design, but all of my professional work has been in costume. I worked for 10 years in various aspects of theater and costume, and you'll see some slides in just a moment, and then returned to academia in 2016 at Auburn University. I have my Master's of Science from there in Consumer and Design Sciences with a focus on apparel, and now, of course, I'm at Cornell. At the bottom of your screen, you see logos from a number of organizations and productions I've been very fortunate to work on over the years, and we will dive right into those. I broke this presentation up into the different kinds of jobs I've held over the years because there are so many different things you can do in costume and apparel, and I thought it would be nice to categorize rather than going chronologically because I've been all over the place. My first job out of college, I like to joke that I graduated with my bachelor's and then a week or two later ran off to the circus the first time. I worked for a youth circus based out of Vermont. It's called Circus Smirkus. And I was there as a stitcher working under designers. First, it was Robin L. McGee in 2006. And then I went back in 2007 under, I think it was Bernadine Vida. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. And then I was invited back in 2015 and stitched for Julie Michael. So all of the work on the page you see, I was a stitcher. I didn't design anything here. And an example of the more recent work, these are the items from 2015 for Julie. She sent me sketches and fabric. And so I was able to cut and drape and stitch for her, but these were all just stitching. So different levels of things as my skill set progressed. And all the photos that are in here, I tried to make sure all the credits were correct. And if it's not labeled, it's a photo I took, or it's a publicity still. The large part of my career was at Cirque du Soleil's CA in Las Vegas. I lived in Vegas for 8 wonderful years, worked at Cirque for 6. I started at Spamalot at the Wynn, and then that closed, and I went over to Cirque after that. I started as a dresser, helping backstage, doing a million loads of laundry, small repairs, that kind of thing. But once my bosses realized what kind of skill set I had in pattern making, draping, and stitching, I was bumped up to a costume technician working on special projects. I'd say the biggest project that I worked on there was taking this design, which is primarily the male character, those are the valets, and we had a female hand balancer come in, and so I needed to reinterpret the design for the female figure. So I built everything from scratch that you see in these photos, and here she is. I was also able to work on a movie, Cirque du Soleil Worlds Away. It was filmed while I was working at the Cirque du Soleil show CA. And I specifically focused on Erica, and I think Erica's in the audience. Thank you for coming. This is Erica Lynn's, and she is an aerialist and multidisciplinary circus artist. And we built her costume, so this was the main one that I focused on for that. And those are designed under Isis Musendin. As a freelance costume designer over the years, I built up an amazing team out in Vegas doing, I teamed up with hair and makeup designers, incredible models, other costume people, and just had a really wonderful, very thorough learning experience. That was a super, super lot of fun out there. Here are some of the shoots that we all worked on. Sometimes it was just friends and I getting together and saying, I have this crazy idea, can we do it? And then we would find a great photographer, go out to the desert. Here's Erica again. She's one of my muses, can you tell? And then worked with a bunch of super fun, non-traditional materials. Here's my disco ball dress. And just really had a great time. The nice thing about finding a team that you work really well with is that no matter how outside the box your idea is, you can really make anything happen. I also was hired as a gig designer on occasion. This was the Midsummer Night's Dream Party at the Palms Casino. In 2011, I was hired to costume their featured atmosphere performers. And so in Vegas, lots of things are sparkly, colorful, and tiny. And so it was a lot of embellishing bathing suits and making headpieces for that round. I was also, here's Mirabal again on Erica. I was also fortunate that dear friends of mine were getting married at the Electric Daisy Carnival, which is a massive electronic dance music festival. And they asked for some assistance on some of their costume pieces, and they ended up in a documentary that was filmed. So this is the documentary, Under the Electric Sky. And I did some embellishments here, and here's the Mirabal dress, and I did the lighting. This was my first foray into wearable electronics. And that was just for a lark, but it became more important to my studies down the road. I've also done a lot of designing for philanthropy and fundraising events because I think that's a really nice way to be able to give back. for Circus Couture, which raises funds for Cure for the Kids, a pediatric cancer clinic out in Las Vegas. We started it in 2010. I was with it for the first 3 years and then stepped aside. It was just an arrangement of a silent auction, runway shows, live circus performances, and I filled a number of roles over the years. Here's my feature line that I did, and this was the very first year when we were figuring out what you're doing. Here is my first big look. This is called the Cupcake, and again, this was built with my team here. They made this incredible wig. It was Kelsey Hush, Megan Mason, and Thomas Richards also worked on it. Photos here by Lee Rivera. And this was originally, I think, 2010 or 2011, and it was remounted in 2019 for the 10th anniversary of Circus Couture. So it's nice to be able to develop relationships with people and then be able to revisit some of your designs down the road and see how things have changed, especially as your design philosophy evolves. This is another look. This was Revolution, and this was created for the promotional materials and then revisited again in 2019. I have since created a wearable art mask because here we are in quarantine for the last year, unfortunately, and I wanted to be able to make something that was mask centered, and so I've been doing a series of wearable art masks, and so that's one of them. Including this one as well. You'll see this full design further down, but this was to raise funds for the Actors Fund, and they ended up liking the photos and using them in advertising, so that was a pleasant surprise. On to academia. This is my second foray into wearable electronics. This was my master's work at Auburn University. In my first year, I wanted to explore how a traditionally trained artist can incorporate contemporary technologies like wearable tech and electronics into their practice. So I made everything you see here. It's traditional handcraft in millinery. This is a wired buckram base. We have a tailored coat. We have some really elaborate hand beading. And underneath that is a really, really intricate circuit of LEDs, and we have LEDs up top here. It was a really big learning curve for me because I'm not an electrician by trade, and I had the fortune of learning how to do things in samples, which I'm glad I did because this gorgeous fabric is actually metallic, and when I originally had my circuit testing out on metallic scraps, it shorted the circuit. So I didn't want to electrocute my model, so I had to come up with a solution, and that's how I learned about insulating your layers and things. So I'm of the ethos that mistakes are opportunities, and you can learn a lot from them. This was my master's thesis project. It was expanding that exploration of traditional handcraft technique with contemporary technology. I looked at how a traditionally trained artisan like myself could use their tips and tricks and try something brand new. So that was with digital printing. I got a small grant from Spoonflower and was able to get some fabrics printed up. So I did a watercolor style painting on watercolor paper. I photographed it and then mirrored it again in Photoshop, uploaded to Spoonflower, and was able to have fabrics printed. You can also see this is some hand painted silk dye up top. I did an exhibition here. This is on the day of my thesis presentation. And previously I had done an exhibition. I went back to Las Vegas and did a Q&A and focus group and interviews with artisans of different walks of life. So we could talk about process and how they all incorporated new technologies into their practice. And this is here's some of the process samples, dye samples with my formula, and this is a half scale. Here are my juried designs that made it into CSA in 2018, 19, and 20. This was my very first CSA in Williamsburg. I was so excited to be there. And my little cupcake, that big cupcake costume with a huge wig, has evolved into a series that I'm calling the mini cupcakes, and they all have different personalities. So here's my cupcake clown. And then that big, massive electronic dance music festival I was talking about, I also attended. And so these were costumes I made for myself to wear while attending. And it was really interesting to do some design research on myself and figure out what worked and what didn't for the future. This would have been in for 2020, but unfortunately COVID happened, so it was virtual and I did not get to present. My contemporary work, or my most recent work, is in, I have been doing circus design all along, and these are some of my design research unitards. I'm calling this the True Heart series. This is Dear Heart, and this is Sweetheart, the second iteration. This is Rachel Fearman. She's a local acrobat and coach at the circus school that we have here in Ithaca. And I worked with her closely to look at paneling techniques to see how different directions of stretch would impact movement and support on the body in aerial arts. And then I took what I learned from that and redid the design a bit into this one. These are all seamed. There's no applique on this, although I do love a good spandex applique, let's be honest. This was, I think, 42 or 43 pattern pieces, and then I was able to cut that down by combining my side seams here, got that down into the 30s range, still kind of a lot, so there's some more work to do. There's a third iteration in process. I've also worked with a small touring troupe from the company Circus. This was their ragtag tour. They mounted it in 2019, and I came on as a stitcher. And then I came back in 2020 as the designer to remount the show with a new cast and 2 returning members. Also through school, I'm doing a lot of interdisciplinary design research with a wearable electronics team. These are, this is called Light Lace, and it is from Dr. Robert Shepard's Organic Robotics Lab at Cornell. And I have worked with them since 2019 to help iterate and develop some compression garments, compression shirts with flexible fiber optic sensors. And in the future, as part of the later stages of my dissertation research, I'm looking at how we can incorporate these sensors into training garments for circus artists. So when they're doing, let's call it multidisciplinary training over the course of a day, we can look at how their bodies impact with their apparatus and or their partners, and see where the points of impact happen and how that compression is affecting them. Most recently, I've been really excited about curating fashion exhibitions. I've been very fortunate. Dr. Denise Green here at Cornell, she's on my committee, has run 2 versions of this class. First, it was Anthropology of the Fashioned Body in 2018, and most recently was revised and called Curating Fashion Exhibitions. And in 2018, we did a class exhibition called Women Empowered Fashions from the Front Line, where we developed this whole physical exhibition, and then team members built the digital version. We had a number of tours come through. There was a lot of media attention because we featured items from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and so that hit the media and kind of exploded. So that was a really good lesson in learning how to navigate media. Thankfully, I had had some experience from before when I was living in Vegas and working on circus couture stuff. So I got to be a little more comfortable speaking on camera and with reporters, that kind of thing. But that was a lesson I had to learn. And then most recently, just launched a couple weeks ago in the Curating Fashion Exhibitions class, is this Flights of Fancy digital exhibition that I put together with my co-curator, Chi Yamakawa. And it started for the class, but it really grew into something way beyond the spec of what Dr. Green was looking for us to do. So I kind of blew it way out of proportion, but I'm pleased with how it came out. And so we were able to interact with the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art archival team. They were instrumental in allowing us to use some images from their archives. There are also black and white publicity photos from the Circus Publicity Collection at Cornell. This is we don't have any information about who this person is, who took the photograph, but I just absolutely love that pose and think it's really reflective of how a costume can really enhance the movements of the performer. And then also called on the circus community for some interviews and discussions. And this is Toy Store, Matt Toy Store Zimmerman, who I met while working at Circus Marcus. He has also worked at a million other circuses over the years and was a valuable source of information talking about the tent as a design space. So I'll drop a link to the exhibit in the chat after I'm done presenting, and I encourage you to go check it out. It's really a rabbit warren of links. It can take days to go through everything, so I encourage you to check it out and have fun. And that's it. Here is my contact info. I'd love to talk to anybody if you have any questions, want some more information about any of the kinds of jobs that I talked about over the time here. And here's a sparkly wearable art mask I made because sometimes you just need a little sparkle. So that's it. Thank you very much. I'll put the link to the exhibit in the chat as well as my email address. Thank you.
I'm Ashley Baker. I'm the Costume Design MFA candidate here in my last year at the University of Oregon. And I'm going to be talking about my wild capstone project that was called Personal Game. So to start off with, like, last year sucked, not gonna lie. We had to cancel our last show. Everything got shut down, and we weren't even sure what this year was going to look like. We had to come up with something, and I had this idea, well, maybe we can do something with costume as the central role in the performance. So I brought that up to a couple of my professors. We started coming up with some guidelines for what this might look like, and then we just kept building it and building it and building it from there until we had a show, basically. So the three goals of this project that we figured out were to develop a show where the costume takes the central role of the performance, produce a work that met COVID-19 guidelines throughout the entire process, and answer the question, if I could design anything, what would it be? The inspiration for the Costume Center came from a few other things that were happening with my education at the time. I had a professor who was teaching Costume History 1, Sandy Bonds. She made loose mention of some new ideas regarding costume as being like the central role in her costume history class. There was mention of World of Wearable Art, and I was just kind of curious about it. So in her Costume History 2 class, I ended up playing with this project where I used the aesthetics of punk to talk about sustainable fashion, and I created this Instagram account where I would put up posters every day to talk about sustainable fashion, and I would do things to this jacket and try to grow plants out of it. So this project ended up being the next step from that piece. For this inspiration for producing work during COVID-19, I really wanted to design a complete project for my capstone. The idea of a theoretical project was thrown out, but I didn't, it just wasn't going to happen. I didn't really feel like that would have been the complete version of what I wanted my education to be. I was also really scared that we would be shutting down the department until the virus was gone. And I didn't want to see that happen. So I knew that there was a way that we could try to do this and make it work. So instead of treating it as a really sad hurdle, I treated it as a challenge, and I took it on. And then lastly, if I could design anything, what would it be? Well, I'm a massive nerd, and I really, really love fantasy, but I wasn't exactly sure how to address fantasy or how to go about it in a certain way. So there were a couple different ideas that I played with. The original idea I thought about was Jungian archetypes, or there was this poem by Billy Collins called The Death of Allegory that I really love. But the figures represented in those works already have images that most people can associate with them. So I didn't really feel like there would be much of an opportunity to get really creative with it. So I ended up landing on Sarah Lynn Bowman's work. It's relatively new. She is a role-play studies scholar, and she specifically focuses on player identities and their relationships to the characters that they play in role-play games. And so for me as a costume designer, and therefore someone who has to think a lot about how audience members relate to and interpret characters presented to them on stage, it really piqued my interest. And then, I mean, I'm a role player, so like this is me here at a LARP that I before COVID, I would go and play. And I am also presenting that in May for the design exhibition. So I'm really excited about being able to do that in the future. And now for the design statement. So Personal Game is a live event that is centered around avant-garde costumes designed to represent 8 out of 9 player identities in role-playing games as identified by game studies scholar Sarah Lynn Bowman. These costumes, as well as the production process and the event itself, took on the restrictions of COVID-19 as an opportunity to innovate and explore new pathways to develop and create live works. And the reason why we went with 8 out of 9 was because I only got approval for 8 costumes. So I just took it, and that was the deal. So let's start looking at these characters. So the first one is Doppelganger, which is essentially like the self-insert in a role-play game. And so in Bowman's terms, it is a character that behaves and thinks almost identically to the player's primary identity. The original idea I had was to do something with mirrors to reflect the audience so that they were part of the playing space, or as it's called in roleplay theory, the magic circle. But it didn't quite work right. So this idea later developed into the player appearing as herself and interacting with the projections of her in costumes from different time periods in fantasy worlds. So Doppelganger's costume was designed to reflect the actress's, this is Audrey Attell, her personal style. I interviewed her and looked through her social media to develop 3 different looks, and this is the one that we landed on. Costumes used for the projections were pulled from our stock and then recorded in front of a green screen about 2 months before we opened the show. And then Devoid is Doppelganger minus an important facet of the player's experience. So it could be a physical ability is missing or a character trait about the player is missing. So for this costume, I decided to off the element of design that I rely on the most when I do costume renderings, which is line. So Devoid has no line and therefore no structure to really hold the costume in one form. The final version of the costume constantly shifted beyond the movement of the actress and became rather amorphous when she wasn't standing up. And then to play off of that was Augmented, which is Doppelganger Plus. So it is some important facet is added to change the player's perspective instead of subtracted. So in this case, I opposed Augmented to Devoid and pushed the sense of line in this costume. Unlike Devoid, Augmented has a complex, rigid structure, and the lights along the edges brought more attention to the outer lines of the costume itself. However, it wasn't really jagged lines, it was these curved lines because I also had Fragmented. Fragmented is a subdued fragment of the primary identity that becomes accentuated, magnified, or twisted into a distinctive feature of the character. So for this one, I decided to take one piece of the body, in this case an eye, and reimagine it as the primary focus of the costume. However, I wasn't just going to make a giant eyeball, and the word fragmented was too interesting to not play with. So I shattered the image of the eye and fragmented the pieces that were then put back together to create this costume. Repressed is a regression into an earlier state of consciousness, such as an inner child-like character. So I purposely designed the costume to be oversized on the actress so that she appeared smaller and really took on the essence of that warmth of childhood. The patchwork was originally inspired by rover skirts that I would see at Ren fairs worn by participants who enacted their own repressed qualities at those events. And then her braids were not only designed to reflect childlike pigtail braids, but they were also built to be another part of her costume that she could play with. And then Idealized is a character that possesses qualities that the player desires, i.e. the best version of themselves. So I took this as playing the God role, whatever that God may be to the player. This was the only moment in all these costumes where I looked at meta-narrative in my design, because it was the only instance where I seemed to be able to have a way to make it fit. I designed the pseudo-Greco-Roman chiton with Himatian, and then gave this character some bird-like qualities to give them this sense of height, as well as the crown with the spikes and the staff to exaggerate the vertical lines. in the costume, and we purposely cast the tallest actor and gave them elevated boots to exaggerate the height in this character so that they could play opposite to oppositional. So oppositional is a character in complete opposition to the player's sense of primary identity. They don't necessarily need to be the villainous character, but they can be built to explore an opposing ideology or mentality. So I decided this one was going to play opposite to Idealized, whereas Idealized is mostly gold in color, avian, and utilizes vertical lines. Oppositional is mostly black in color, hails from the depths of the oceans, and utilizes horizontal lines with her long tentacles. The last one was experimental, which is basically the wild card. Experimental is a character created as an experiment in order to explore a bizarre concept, challenge the participants' role-playing abilities, highlight interesting themes in the game, or test the boundaries of the game experience. This costume itself really evolved over time, but the main thread through the design was that the performer was going to alter or experiment with their costume during the performance in some way. I decided to approach the design for the actor in a similar way to Doppelgangers by utilizing his own personal style, but with the twist of red to tie him to the items that were placed on the stage. The pieces on the stage were a mixture of odd structures I designed, a piece from our stock, and a mold of our retired costume shop manager that was lovingly gifted to us. And rather than appearing in a completed costume, the actor experiments with the pieces in the space until he creates a new identity that he is satisfied with. So this is him playing with one of those many identities in the space. And then lastly, just to polish off this presentation, these were two of the costumes that I really had to focus on for this show, which was Augmented and Fragmented. They were the pieces that I was given to build, and I've never built anything like either of these before. So Augmented didn't actually have a full structure until about 3 weeks before the show opened. We were having a lot of difficulty finding rods that would actually hold up all the petals on her, and that wouldn't hurt her either, and also wouldn't cause any problems with the lighting. And then Fragmented, I built the mock-up originally out of cardboard and duct tape, and we had issues where it fell apart in the mock-up phase 3 times before I finally figured out that the original design wasn't going to work, and I had to separate the pieces so that instead of all the weight being held up at the shoulders, it was split between the shoulders and the waist. So in the end, I was really pleased with this, and I'm so glad I got to do this. And that leads me lastly to some quick facts about this. The entire production process took about 7.5 months from me emailing my professors to us actually opening this show. There were 3 performances each night with 12 seats in the audience. The production process and performances were developed with the university's health and safety team to make sure that we were following the guidelines of the university and the state. About 50 people total worked on this project. They were mostly students, and they were getting production credit for this. So I was able to bring a little bit back to the theater department. I am so happy about that. And the recording of the final production is on YouTube. And the best part is, no one got COVID. It worked. We were successful. And with that, I'm going to hand this back to Deborah.
Wow, your excitement is just infectious. And you know, isn't it amazing that costume design engages it engages the head and the hands? And good for you to insist upon practice, insist upon building these costumes, and then you've had that extra excitement about overcoming all of those production issues. You know what? I always say that costume designers are the most resourceful people in the world. And we have to be, because we don't have any money and we don't have any time. And we just have obstacles to overcome. So good for you. How wonderful. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great work. All right, so now it's question time.
One just came in. Let's see here. It says, Erica says she worked as an acrobatic choreography. There's frequently a conflict between circus artists' safety and performance needs and the costume designer's vision. This can lead to sensitive creative negotiations. Can you talk more about the sensor-enhanced compression garments you worked on and how they could be integrated into support the acrobatic costume design process?
All right, Jenny
Leigh.
Absolutely. So the idea behind these is that we'd like to help improve safety, especially for people who are learning. I'd say it's less for the elite level at this point and more for those who are just learning. So the idea behind these garments is that the fibers, think of it like stretch elastic for a beaded bracelet. It's that kind of feel. So there's no concern about digging into the body. And the pack that they connect to is about the size of a mic pack. So it would need to be strategically placed on the body so that it would not interfere with safety or cause pain or anything. And the idea behind it at this point is to look at where the body impacts the apparatus so that designers can use that information to design better training garments. So do we need to put extra firm fabric? Does it need to be a specific direction of stretch? Do we need a little extra neoprene? Erica knows this, but many other people may not. Typically right now in designing for circus, you look at bruise patterns on an acrobat's body, and that's how you know where to put the protection. And if we can avoid that from the get-go, that's the goal. Further studies can be done incorporating physio, so they could be watching this in real time and identifying safety issues. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
What made you decide, after having a career and building your career in costuming and then costume design, what made you decide to go for a doctorate?
There are a couple parts to this question. I am, like Ashley, I am also a giant nerd. And I always knew that I wanted to teach at a university level someday. I had some wonderful mentors in my undergrad, Lynn, Blake, Jill Carey, incredible people. And they showed me what a wonderful teacher could be. And then I went off, had my great career, and did so much sewing. Here's a lesson for everyone. I did so much sewing that I blew out my shoulders before I turned 30. So I couldn't have a job as a 40-hour-a-week stitcher anymore. And so I needed to pivot. And so I thought, great time to go into academia. I always thought it would be, you know, when I was in my 40s or my 50s, and I would be a more mature student. And it just elevated my timeline. So I decided to go for a PhD rather than an MFA because I was very interested in the research process and wanted to see what kind of avenues that would open up.
And of course, Cornell has that wonderful school of textile science.
Yes. Yep, our department is merged. It's fiber science and apparel design. And so we're able to do projects like I'm on a team that's doing a lot of work studying kids' face masks for kids age 4 to 6. And we're combined between fiber science and apparel design so we can look at multiple levels of this.
Such a great opportunity. My question for Ashley is, Ashley, what's your dream job?
Oh gosh. I mean, I'm finding that I'm falling more and more in love with these non-traditional styles of costume and really exploring and having my own agency over what I design. And the more I reflect back on projects that I've done in the past, and I think that this is going to tie into the question that Mary Gibson sent to us. I've done a lot of traditional work where I've designed like shows for the theater department and stuff. And like I've worked for Disney and a tiny bit for Cirque du Soleil, but that was wardrobe. It was similar to what you were doing with Luzia. Yeah, I love Cirque du Soleil. So it's so great. But the more I think about it, the more I'm seeing these non-traditional forms just being the things that really draw me. So I originally thought that I wanted to be a professor, and I still love teaching, and I teach here a little bit at the university as part of my graduate employee position. But I'm definitely really falling in love with these strange, weird costumes or making some sort of statement with what I design.
Well, I know that you know that's a really different career path, and that in costuming, it really seems that you can do everything, just not all at once. And that you have to really be serially monogamous to your field at any time. If you're working at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, of course, you're designing for other people. And you don't have the opportunity or the independence to really do what you've been doing. I want to comment on both of you. And I think if there are graduate students who are part of our audience or the majority of our audience, I do want to compliment both of you. I think what should happen is that costume design programs and costuming programs need to train designers to speak in public. And I think this often gets forgotten among scholars and designers. Designers used to be able to think that they were all backstage and never had to communicate effectively. But in fact, and Jenny Leigh pointed this out, she's gotten comfortable speaking to reporters. And as media and social media has become so much more important, the old school way of a graduate student standing at a podium, reading a paper and showing a keynote is much less effective than teaching effectively to an audience who's engaged. And I think you did a great job, and Jenny Leigh did a great job, and both of you are very polished. So often in my classes, I'm having to say, smile, look at us. When you're giving your presentation, don't stand with your back toward the sketch. Stand with, you're presenting to professors and your peers, stand and look at everyone. So I think you did a great job. The more you present, the more you teach, the more you show your costumes to groups of people, the more you speak to directors, the easier and more fluent you will be speaking about your work. So you did a great job. After graduation, Ashley, what are you going to do?
That's the big thing right now. I'm trying to figure out how to continue doing this independently. Because I'm really loving it. I want to move back up to the Seattle area. It wasn't where I grew up, but it's the place that really quickly became my home, partially from undergrad and then living up there for a while afterwards. I love it so much up there, and I'm going to find a way to make this work. There is an art scene there. It's small, but I want to make it bigger.
Great. And Jenny Leigh, what are you doing for the summer?
To be determined, but always working on my dissertation. Yes, I am. I'm set to graduate in 2022 and will be on the job market if anyone will be hiring.
Have you started writing?
Yes, I have. Yep, I've been, I split in a tiny nutshell, looking at safety and function and what circus people wear when they train and perform for my dissertation. And I broke it up into archival research of circus costume history, a humongous interview series with contemporary and current performing artists, and then doing that wearable tech experimentation for the future of circus training attire. So those are
do you see yourself, Jenny Leigh, do you see yourself working for I don't know, Nike or Puma on sports clothes, or working with, I hesitate to say, DuPont or Monsanto, or do you see yourself working for a sportswear company in the future as an expert?
I think there would be a natural transition that way, and I think that's the beauty of a costume career, is that it trains you in so many foundational skills that can be applicable to different industries. And so especially with working with circus artists who are artist athletes, I think it would be a natural bridge to go into sportswear. I'm not an athlete myself, so that would be a learning curve for me, but having worked with them, I think it would be fun.
Absolutely. Circus performers are athletes.
Yes.
Absolutely. And with your background in design and with what we just saw, what did you call them?
My True Heart series, yeah.
The True Heart series. I thought that was beautiful. Made me think of Serena Williams. I thought, oh, she should go working for Serena. No?
I would be honored to work with Serena Williams. He's extraordinary. Yeah.
And innovative choices for the field. So I could see you working in so many different areas with your big background. So yeah, very, very impressive. Well, I really enjoyed it. I love graduate students. Jenny, Leigh, and Ashley, this has been such a pleasure for me. I am inspired by you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a little plug, if you don't mind. I've been volunteering behind the scenes with the Conversations on Dress series, and I would love to see more grads involved. So if you are interested or have students who would be interested, please feel free to share my email address. I'll put it in the chat again, but I would love to talk to them about volunteering behind the scenes for this.
Thanks, Jenny Leigh. All right. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great pleasure.